My name is Lim Zi Jie and my matrix number is 2x6353. For the moral judgment, where I stand, I strongly agree that government inaction on climate change fundamentally breaches basic human rights. Both the human causes of climate change and its effects on people are well supported by data. According to scientists, human behaviors such as burning fossil fuels and deforestation are the primary contributors to climate change, which is raising temperature, increasing the frequency of extreme weather events, and upsetting ecosystems. These trends pose a major threat to fundamental human rights, including the right to life, health, and a healthy environment. Vulnerable populations such as those living in low-lying coastal areas or regions prone to drought are especially at risk. Therefore, when governments do not take significant action to address climate change, they are essentially failing in their duty to protect the rights and welfare of their citizens as well as future generations. Regarding Greta Thunberg's criticism, I believe they are baseless and quite concerning. Greta is a teenage climate activist who has spoken out about the pressing need for climate action with amazing bravery and tenacity. Millions of people worldwide have been motivated to join the battle against climate change by her fervent advocacy. However, some opponents decide to target her personally rather than discussing the content of her message. To discredit her and divert attention from the pressing problem of climate change, lies and conspiracy theories regarding her background or goals are spread. This trend is alarming because it shows a lack of polite and productive engagement with significant societal concerns. When evaluating these issues, I take into account both scientific data regarding climate change and its effects as well as moral precepts founded on the protection of human rights and the welfare of future generations. The government's inaction on climate change not only violates these moral principles, but it also demonstrates a lack of leadership and accountability. In a similar vein, Greta Thunberg's critics fail to recognize the seriousness of the climate crisis and the importance of her action. In addition to people appreciating and supporting activists like Greta who are working for a sustainable future, governments must take strong action to tackle climate change.
I agree that taking proactive steps to address climate change is morally required in order to preserve the environment, advance justice, and guarantee a livable future for everybody. Addressing climate change is not only an environmental responsibility but also a moral necessity that intertwine the global justice, human rights, and the preservation of a livable future. The impact of climate change are not felt equally, with a vulnerable community, often in poorer regions, bearing the burden of its consequence. These communities, which contribute least to the global emission, face food insecurity, displacement, and devastating natural disaster, creating deep moral and ethical concern. Continuing to neglect this disparity, showing injustice and violate the core principles of fairness and equity. The global response must reflect this moral obligation to act, ensuring that the most affected are protected and supported. Greta Thunberg's activism embodies the moral voice of the younger generation who will inherit the worst effect of climate change. While there are a lot of opinion on specific strategy, her efforts are grounded in scientific evidence and raise vital ethical questions about the needs to protect both human rights and the environment. Thunberg is not just calling for environmental change; advocating the she is advocating for the protection of human dignity and future generation who face the worst consequence of inaction. Attempts to ignoring her message or discredit the scientific consequence on climate change are morally indefensible as they undermine fairness, truth, and the global commitment to justice. The ongoing inaction by government in reducing emission and addressing the root causes of climate change constitutes an ethical violation of human rights. This inaction knowingly endanger vulnerable population and the future of all humanity. The failure to act on such predictable risks represent an abandonment of moral responsibility, betraying the obligation to protect human life, rights, and well-being. Government must recognize their role in preventing harm and fulfilling their obligation to those who they serve. In conclusion, a deep and reasoned ethical perspective make it clear that climate change is not only an environmental issue but also a critical human rights that require urgent action. The failure to act injustice that must be addressed. Greta Thunberg's advocacy is a powerful call to action, highlighting the moral urgency to combat climate change for the sake of justice, fairness, and the preservation of human dignity. The scientific evidence and moral imperative align, offering a compelling argument for drastic policy change aimed at safeguarding the future of our planet and its people. Thank you.
My name is Teh Li Wen. Metric number is 292995. For the moral judgment, where I stand, I agree that the government inaction on climate change is a violation of basic human rights. The reason for this observation is that the ethical standard guiding this analysis should be informed by universally recognized human rights, such as the right to life, health, food, water, housing, and responsibility for the environment. To avoid foreseeable harm to vulnerable groups, especially young and future generations, who will inherit these consequences disproportionately. These core principles are enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and have been reaffirmed by almost all states. Furthermore, having balanced the moral imperative to protect human rights and prevent harm to disadvantaged groups against the scientific reality of current and projected impact of climate change on humanity, the moral judgment based on evidence is that the continued inaction and failure of government to significantly reduce emissions constitute a moral violation of fundamental human rights duty. For deliberate indifference to this foreseeable threat to human rights is an abdication of responsibility to citizens and future generations. Greta Thunberg emphasized that climate inaction endangers life. Climate change engages the right to life as enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other international treaties. Increasing global temperature, extreme weather events, and environmental degradation lead to disasters such as flood, drought, and wildfire that claim life and destroy livelihood. Government inaction increase this risk and fail to protect population from predictable and preventable harm. Besides that, Thunberg's speech and activities emphasize that the relationship between climate change and environmental degradation. She believed that failure to address greenhouse gas emissions and environmental destruction violate people's rights to a healthy environment, which is gaining ground as a fundamental right. Her future 5-day campaign encouraged global action, particularly by younger people, to hold accountable government that allow pollution and ecological destruction to continue. In conclusion, Greta Thunberg activism emphasized the moral necessity government to act on climate change in order to defend human rights. Government have a duty to act decisively on climate change to protect human rights.
My name is Khiew Yee Mun and my matrix number is 294199. Now I would like to present my moral judgment. At the first, I agree that the government inaction on climate change is violates of basic human rights. So, for the climate change pose a serious threat to basic human rights such as access to food, clean water, health care, and a safe environment. When governments fail to act, they endanger not only current but also future generations, particularly marginalized populations who are most vulnerable to its effect. Governments have an ethical obligation to address climate change and ensure justice, equity, and environmental protection. Inaction compromises these values and threatens our collective future. Greta Thunberg has faced criticism for her tone, age, and what some see as oversimplifications of complex issues. Critics argue that her activism lacked detailed policy recommendations or that her approach is too confrontational. However, these critiques often come from ideological opposition to climate action rather than her message itself. De- Despite the criticism, Grace's role is not to create policies but to raise awareness and inspire action. From a moral perspective, Greta Thunberg is a climate hero. Her activism has motivated millions around the world to demand urgent action on climate change. By holding politicians accountable and emphasizing intergenerational justice, she highlights the moral responsibility to protect the planet. While her approach may not appeal to everyone, her commitment to addressing climate change aligns with the ethical need for immediate solutions. The conclusion: government inaction on climate change is not only a policy failure but also a moral issue, as it jeopardizes fundamental human rights and the well-being of future generations. Greta Thunberg's advocacy serves as a powerful reminder of the ethical responsibility to act. Her efforts, despite criticism, have brought global attention to the urgent need for equitable and sustainable solution to the climate crisis. That's all from me. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Fatin Fakhira Binti and this is my presentation for BPNK 3123 Management Active from GroupM. Today I will share my moral judgment on climate change, a critical issue that requires urgent action for government, business and individual alike. Climate change is driven primarily by human activity, especially the burning of fossil fuel. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, has consistently highlighted the devastating effect of rising global temperature, melting ice cap, rising sea level, and extreme weather events. This impact overwhelms vulnerable population, putting their livelihood and the welfare of future generations at risk. Ignore this fact is not just irresponsible, it's unethical. From an ethical standpoint, my judgment is shaped by utilitarian principle which emphasize minimizing harm and ensuring collective welfare, reducing greenhouse gas emission and adopting sustainable practice are action that benefit humanity as a whole. Additionally, deontological ethics guide my conviction that everyone has a right to be clean and secure environment. Upholding this right is a moral obligation we must not ignore. I apply Vela's quest ethical decision-making model to analyze this issue. While some argue that climate change might slow economic growth, prioritizing short-term gains over long-term sustainability jeopardizes justice for underserved community and future generation. The ethical choice is clear. Government must enforce sustainability policies, business should embrace green practice, and individual must make environmentally conscious decisions. In conclusion, combined climate change is more than a necessity. It's a moral duty. Scientific, evident, and ethical reasoning emphasize the need for collective action to protect our planet and ensure a sustainability future for all. Together, we can fulfill our shared obligation to safeguard humanity and the environment. Thank you.
Hi and a very good day. My name is Myza Balqis Binti Shah and my matrix number is 291283. So now I will continue the presentation and explain about my moral judgment on the topic of climate change. So I strongly believe that the fundamental human rights are raised by the government's inactivity on climate change. So there's a few reasons behind of why do I say so. So let's have a look at the first one. The first one is vulnerable populations are disproportionately affected by the climate change effects, which include extreme weather events, which are very dangerous to the human being, and limited resource of scarcity, which directly endangers their rights to food, water, safety, health, and also life. So moving on to the second point, a variety of human rights are seriously threatened by the long-term effects of the climate change, such as rising inequality and displacement. So let's have a look at rising inequality. Basically, it says basically defined to us of the unequal impact, where climate change basically doesn't affect everyone equally. Vulnerable populations, often in developing countries, bear the brunt of its effect first and worst. This can lead to the widening gaps between the rich and the poor, both within and between countries. And as for the second effect, which is the displacement, it actually relates to climate migrants, where climate change can lead to the increase of displacement between humans, both within and across borders. So people may be forced to leave their homes due to their rising sea levels, extreme weather events, resource scarcity, as mentioned in the previous point, limited resource of scarcity, and also other climate-related impact. The government basically have an obligation to uphold these rights, and it may be argued that they have failed to do so by ignoring climate change. And it is possible to actually consider the government's inaction on climate change to be a violation of fundamental human rights. So the argument that government inaction on climate change constitutes a violation of fundamental human rights is gaining traction due to the following reasons. One of it is because government have a fundamental obligation to protect their citizens. Therefore, it is very important to note that the legal and political landscape around this issue is still ongoing and evolving. However, the argument that government inaction on climate change constitutes a human rights violation highlights the urgent need for governments to take decisive action or any immediate action to mitigate the climate change and protect the rights of all people, both present and future. I think that's all from me. Thank you.